How can we better integrate learning and work to create a better economic future for all Americans? That was the central question of the inaugural Human Potential Summit, a gathering of employers, educators, nonprofits, and others this fall in Denver. That question is also at the heart of our work here at Working Nation, a media partner for the summit. Founder Taylor McLemore describes himself as an investor, venture builder, and community connector. McLemore tells me he built the Human Potential Summit and is building a movement on the simple idea that people matter, workers matter, and they're not being served by the system we currently have in place.
I would say the most important starting point is a belief that there is a major problem that we face as a nation and as a society, and it's that our work and learning systems are more broken than they are functional. And while there's talk about incremental change, that's not going to drive what we need. And I think that there's multiple pieces that have led to why those systems are not functioning well. And I can define how they're not functioning well. But the biggest thing is that education has slid way off in one side and work has slid way off in the other side. And they aren't connected as they need to be. And I believe that the vast majority of education we need is about how people get into and find themselves capable of pursuing successful careers that they love and enjoy. Education isn't about entertainment. It's not something that you do for just fun. There are forms of that, but like what our nation needs is career-connected education that's highly performant and aligned with employer demand. And we don't have that. So we said we need to get the right people together to work on that.
Do you think we've ever had that in our country?
Good question. Probably not. At least not in recent history. I think there have been periods where you found momentary alignment of the labor market due to crises like around World War II and things like that, where we needed massive shifts that were related to existential threats. And I would argue that leadership at the time did some things to make it happen. Since then, we've kind of let the education industrial complex do what it wanted. They're arguably one of the best lobbies ever. So I think that maybe at moments, but you would have to go back to early in our nation's history when economies were very local and very regional. And then I would argue that they probably worked pretty well then, but not in a modern format. I think that the complexity that sometimes feels overwhelming about our nation, whether it's this topic or others, between federal, state, local, private sector, philanthropic sector, I think that's a feature, not a bug to the system. And I think it's actually one of the greatest manifestations of how markets can actually work really well. It's why, I think bank regulation is the same story. It's actually great that it's mostly state run because it compartmentalizes risk and that incentivizes experimentation. And then when you actually see that someone did something that worked really well, others can adopt it. I think we should fight it out with a bunch of great ideas in the marketplace to see what works. And the ones that are winning and performing really well and defining that as success for the worker learners, success for companies in a vibrant economy, will pull along other people and the not great ideas will die. And that's how it should actually work.
That's a very powerful statement that it's not one size fits all, which I agree with. I think what happens in your community is important, but how do you share that knowledge? How do you show those examples of things that are working?
There's a major challenge in that the work and learning journey is something where there's not a lot of data transparency. The easy answer is transparency to what's actually happening, but it's big and messy and complex. To choose one example, we have a multi-hundreds of billions of dollars higher education system, significantly underwritten by our federal government and therefore us as citizens, that gets to continue doing what it's doing largely based on accreditation. And the accreditors mostly don't look at how people perform in careers afterwards. And we just let the system keep doing the thing. So I really wish we were putting as much energy into accreditation that we're putting into accreditation into data transparency of outcomes of students. And that would allow other people to see past just all the money that's spent on marketing universities and say, well, but what actually happened? What happened to the people that went through? How are they doing? To me, that actually would allow it to be a much more performant market system.
Do you think that we can give everybody the skills they need for when they walk out, say with a high school diploma or a college degree?
No, definitely not. And I think that's not that this is some new thought, but I think a major challenge is that we've embraced this idea of get through high school. Everyone should get through high school is our theory. And then you should, if you want to be a high wage earner, you should go to college. And then you're mostly just like off on your career. That's based on research, not factually accurate. But I think if you just look at the large numbers, we're totally missing the forest for the trees. There's 10 times more workers in the labor force than there are active students in the university system at any given time. And the people that are in the workforce will spend decades there learning on the job. But when you ask someone, how do you feel about the learning system? No one thinks about work. Everyone thinks about college, university, and K-12. So it's really embracing this mindset of lifelong learning. And how does that become something that, we're comfortable with, that it's a journey that you'll never finish? And that's actually a good thing. That's what would make the system more dynamic so that people could not have to be one thing for their, the majority of their life. People should have flexibility.
And that's where the tapping into the human potential, I think, comes in as well. The underlying idea here is to help people find some purpose in their lives and do something that's going to give them the financial security they need, but also give them a sense of satisfaction.
100%. I think that I deeply care about economic mobility as a concept because everyone deserves dignity. Everyone deserves an opportunity to live a life that is safe, healthy, fulfilling, and those elements. But sometimes we get stuck on economic mobility conversations. It's just like, what was the wage change? But I think we're missing out on the humanity if we don't say it's economic mobility and fulfilling careers. And whatever that means to that individual, why can't that be an and statement that we embrace as a society? I think that would be a richer, fuller place to live.
So we've talked about educators. How do we prepare the educators to prepare the students for the work that maybe is out there for them?
And I'll kind of limit my answer to post-secondary because I think there's probably different answers in, high school settings versus post-secondary. So number one is that we've got the incentives all wrong. There are so few institutions of higher education where you're actually rewarded for being a great preparer of people for careers. We have one of the things that I think is really interesting. I might sound deeply critical of universities, and I think they deserve some of it, but also our nation wouldn't be what it is without our universities. They've helped build this country. But we've conflated the idea of an R1 research capability with training young people for careers, and we do it all in the same place when figuring out how to push the laws of physics couldn't be more different than helping 99% of people get ready to go into a career that's going to be sustainable for them and their family. And so we've wrapped those all together, and the educators who are stuck straddling that fence, because I give them total credit and benefit of the doubt that they want to do good work, but success within a lot of these big university systems has nothing to do with that. So imagine if they had variable compensation based on the career outcomes of their students. Guarantee they would act differently.
And what is the role of the employer in all of this?
I think the biggest thing is a mindset shift first. And I think we really have to be thoughtful to meet business where they're at. Running a business is hard. And anytime you speak with a thoughtful business leader and you're like, hey, you should do one more thing, their answer is like, no, I shouldn't. I should focus on running my business. But counter to that is your people have to be part of running your business well. And you being the trainer and educator of them is the way that you are going to become a market leader. And so that mindset shift, and most moderately sized companies to large ones have learning and training departments, those sort of things. But usually those people are pretty sidelined. They don't get a lot of resources. And then when people don't know how to do their jobs, they get blamed, which is like a bad equation overall. So it's how do we help employers and company leaders embrace the role of education leader in our society so that hopefully with that broader narrative, they can embrace that internally at their companies and change resource allocation so that they're actually walking the walk on our people are our biggest asset.
What's at stake if we don't act now to get this done?
You can think of it at so many different levels. I'll start at the most global, and I tend to try to avoid thinking of the world as pure conflict between nations because I really don't think that that's how it has to be, and honestly how we've gotten to the state of our deeply integrated global systems. But part of it is that we have led as a nation in so many ways, and I think we're falling behind at how we can build the technologies of the future that allow our societies to move forward and offer more opportunity and progress to more people compared to other nations. And that doesn't have to be zero sum. We should just be doing better ourselves and figuring out how we influence the future of how technology and innovation evolves is human-centric. And we need to step into a stronger position of leadership there globally. On the local level, it's that if we don't work on these things now, like, I think democracy is at risk. I think that you see a lot of the dissatisfaction that's coming up in election cycles of what are people most unhappy about. And it's honestly, you could say it's economics. I go back to the root cause of work and learning systems that are more broken than functional. If we change that, I think we would be a much more happy, engaged, and stable democracy. Not to sound too hyperbolic, but I think it's global in nature, and like democracy is at risk if we don't get it right.
Are you optimistic that we can get it right?
Yeah, I am. I worry that if you look at our history, though, we usually have to feel a lot of pain before we make big changes. Usually we react well when the pain starts getting ratcheted up. But if anything is true, our economy, our technological innovation are all happening so fast. I worry about our ability to react if the pain gets dialed up too fast and too hard. And so it's about, over our history, we've usually had at least years, if not decades, to fix stuff. And I worry we live in a world where we might only have months versus years. And that is the thing that concerns me, but I do hold deep optimism that we can solve major problems because I believe in human potential.
The majority of Americans say they find purpose in their lives through their occupation. Helping people develop their human potential is what attracted founding sponsor Stand Together to the summit. The organization describes itself as a philanthropic community that, among other things, drives solutions on education and economic opportunity. Ryan Stowers is the Senior Vice President of Stand Together and Executive Director of the Charles Koch Foundation. Stowers tells me that he too sees a problem in the way our education and work systems work together.
There are a lot of Americans that aren't reaching their potential right now for a whole variety of reasons that we could go into. And so some of it's the recognition that the state of the current work and learning ecosystem isn't working for many. And we want to change that in a way where it could be a positive for all people who engage in the work and learning space. And so human potential is just one way to describe what we see as a person's ability to pursue the American dream, to find purpose and meaning in their lives, to self-actualize as far as whatever portion of that self-actualization comes from work and learning in a formal way. That's an additive component to their ability to becoming the best version of themselves. And given the advancement in technology, given where we are right now, there's no reason why most or all people can't find that kind of pathway and find that kind of fulfillment, find that kind of connection with who they are as humans, reach that potential and self-actualize. So that's in a nutshell why we're doing this.
And part of being the best that you can be as a person requires some financial stability. And with the way the work is changing and how we do our jobs, and not enough people who have the skills to do those good paying jobs, how do we address that?
It's a great question. And I don't profess to have all the answers. I do think that some of the barriers preventing people from reaching the kind of economic mobility are some of the same barriers preventing them from gaining the access. If we eliminate some of these barriers and help people see themselves and how they fit in a new economy and help them see the steps that they can take based on who they are, help them see that society and employers and business value what they bring to the table, their skills, their experiences. I believe in humans' ability to, if that pathway's there, they'll take it. Right now, the barriers are in their way, and I think they're the same. I think the barriers preventing people from finding that economic stability and economic mobility are the same barriers preventing them from finding connection, purpose, and meaning in work. We need to invest in ways to eliminate those barriers to help people.
One of the tracks of the conference is untapped potential. And I did a panel that I moderated on older, mid-career and older workers. I know the one right before me was on people with disabilities in the workforce. Mm-hmm. I've talked to employers, and Sometimes they say they hear this, that there's all these older workers and they have not yet acted. And I don't know how to change that narrative to make them understand that they've got people working for them who they can upskill.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a combination of, if you think about some of the themes that we discussed, getting to know your individual people and recognizing who they are, what gives them fulfillment, what their aptitudes are, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, who they are as individuals, invest in employees in that way. The people who are in that stage of life they'll be revealed in those moments. And then seeing what they have to offer and bring to the table that's unique relative to other parts of your workforce, and figuring out how to make sure that they're in the right roles to deliver in ways, to contribute in ways that are, again, fulfilling for the individual and beneficial for the company. So finding that mutual benefit. And I think this dovetails really well with, you're talking about people within the companies where there are opportunities to upskill, whether they're 25 years old or 65 years old.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter. An employer taking the time to really understand who their employees are will discover those opportunities, and they're smart enough, they face the right incentives to double down and invest in those ways to help empower those people. But it also applies to the people that Byron Auguste was talking about, the people who maybe aren't in your company, but might not be viewed as the ideal hire because they're in their 50s. I turned 50 this year, 50 plus, 60, when in fact, the skills they have and a lot of the soft skills that Anish was talking about from LinkedIn today that are going to be even more valuable moving forward. Some of our people in that demographic are incredible at some of those soft skills. The emotional intelligence, the ability to communicate, they've been doing it all their life. They've got demonstrative skills in those spaces. Can we invest in ways to empower them as well? And so if we get this right, it really does open the doors for people, regardless of the challenge that they're facing or the way that they may have been marginalized in the past for one reason or another. It should eliminate those things and open up opportunities for all people.
Yeah, I want to double down on that and say that when I talk to employers, they tell me those are the things they want. They want someone who has the institutional knowledge, to use that term, or has that problem solving because maybe they've solved them in the past. They don't always have to be managers. They don't always have to be in the C-suite. Working side by side someone, you have to negotiate a lot of things, and sometimes you have to solve problems. So they say they want it, and then they turn around and not necessarily hire and invest in it. I would love to see that change. Just observing this space myself, I would love to see that change.
You brought up the other panel that focused on empowering people with disabilities. The fascinating thing I find about that part of the conversation is if you think about what it takes to employ people with extreme disabilities, you have to take an individualized approach because you have to know who they are and what they bring to the table. From my perspective, it opens the door for the kind of individualized approach we need to take with every employee. And I know that sounds strange.
It sounds perfectly right to me.
You and I both have strengths and weaknesses. My weaknesses at times can be disabilities to me. I know I'm conflating some things,
But realities are on all levels.
that's right. It's just information. It's more in-depth information about who I am and what I bring to the table that can help me succeed and help the employer advance his or her purposes in their business. And that's the kind of approach we've got to take. So I'm excited about some of the investments that are being made to empower people with disabilities. I've got 2 siblings with severe disabilities, and the employment opportunities they've had in their lives have been transformative. But it required someone to really understand who they are and where they can add value in a way that's beneficial to them and to the company. That's the approach we need to take for everyone.
How do we communicate the opportunities to people and make sure they know? If you're an employer, any employers listening, I would say, think about how you communicate that to either your current talent or to someone who may be coming to you and say, hey, I may want to work for you. And that you're invested in them as an individual and finding their path.
I agree. And Michael Horn mentioned how we just simple things like how we present job descriptions, but that in and of itself is a marketing tool. You're sending a signal to a future hire of what you really care about. And that's where I think that's where it begins. And then to your point, managers have got to change. They've got to change their approach. And part of it is Maria Flynn used the term love today. I mean, there is a compassion and a human connection that will be necessary in the future to really bring this kind of individualization to come to pass. And I don't think a lot of us know how to do this in management, in business, but what an incredible opportunity for innovation, for trying new things, seeing how they work. And then as businesses see the way they empower people and the response they get from their people, the mutual benefit that's formed between employee and employer, I think you're going to see it take off a lot more rapidly.
Our CEO and founder, Art Bilger, he talks about purpose and we talk about dignity. And you spend so much of your time in a job in your life, whether it's 8 hours a day or work 2 jobs in 16 hours a day. Finding a job that makes you feel that you have dignity in it is very important. And finding a job that makes you feel like you have purpose. And purpose doesn't have to be Nobel Prize winning purpose, but something that makes you feel good about what you're doing. I think that is something, again, Maria used the term love. I love the idea of purpose and dignity in work and how we can achieve that as a society.
I love it too. And I think it's critical. And 7 out of 10 Americans say that they find real purpose in their lives through their occupation. So you're right. So this is something people think about. This is something they want, they demand it, they want it. This brings us full circle to one of your first questions. And you made this point, and we need to not forget it. Some people aren't in the economic situation where purpose can be what they focus on the most. And all the more reason we've got to break down these barriers so that if someone isn't finding that they're respected or that they're given dignity as an individual, they have the luxury of making a switch to go find that somewhere else. They can go find purpose and meaning in their lives through a different job with a different employer. That's the kind of environment we've got to have. It's got to be so dynamic that all people have that kind of flexibility to find exactly what you're describing.
That was Ryan Stowers, Senior Vice President of Stand Together and Executive Director of the Charles Koch Foundation. And earlier, Taylor McLemore, founder of the Human Potential Summit. I'm Ramona Schindelheim, Editor-in-Chief of Working Nation. Thanks for listening.